Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/KYHistoryPod. Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and we're going to continue our discussion with Pete Langford, the author of the Langfords of Rockcastle County. You mentioned, digging deeper and so forth, and you mentioned this too about newspapers.com, and I mean that is newspapers.com is awesome. But anything, what else did you, you're being overseas as well? Like, what else did you have to go? How much digging did you have to do? What was your sources besides just newspaper.com and Ancestry? Anything else?
So there was there's like a blog that somebody, I can't remember the name of the lady that did the blog, and it was called The Sound of Shaking Paper. I don't know if you've...
Yes, I know that one. Yeah.
And that was an absolute treasure trove of information. It was really well researched, really well structured. It was categorized. So, absolutely have to give credit to the person that ran that blog, because that was a big help. I did go on to ancestry.com and started to try to use that to piece together the different genealogies. And then I went onto a Facebook group. It was a Rockcastle County genealogy, local history group. So I joined this Facebook group, and I think I just typed the message, "Hi, I'm Pete from England. I'm researching a book about your county. Can anyone help?" And the people were they were so friendly, so warm. I was a complete stranger. There you go, shaking paper, excellent. And people got in touch with me, and a few of the people were actually the descendants of the people that I was researching and writing about, and they were saying to me, that individual was my great-grandfather, and they could send me more information that probably wasn't available on the internet, but from family legends and things that had been passed down. So I had such an immense amount of help from some of the local people and some of the descendants of the people that I was writing about, and those are some of the people that are still on my Christmas card list.
Well, that's just so true to historical accounts. If you can find somebody who was there, and I mean, most of the people that were, say, in the 1880s, 1890s, they're passed away, but you could possibly find their grandkid who may have got the stories from them. And that's at least not a first-hand, but a second-hand account, and that helps out a lot. And I do want to bring up the shaking papers, because it is great. I stumbled upon this by looking for Bethurum information, and it really this little highlighted area here, that is like the area that it's focused on the most. And Bethurum's, Langfords. I mean, you're going to find a lot of good stuff on this website if you're interested. But yeah, it's really good. I like it a lot. I gotta give a shout out to the creator. That it is.
It really is a good resource, and it really helped me a lot with the research for the book.
Getting more into the back on the Langford story here. We got 2 rounds of feud. What's the difference? What separates them? What changes them? Who's involved more or less?
So obviously the first feud that began after the Civil War, which was really the Langford and Bethurum families united. They were united through marriage and through blood. Some of them through the genealogy. So they had that kinship bond. But the Langfords and the Bethurum faction were basically fighting several other families that had aligned themselves with the clan faction. And there's certain names that crop up. There was Owens, there was Adams, there was Snodgrass, for example. And effectively, this feud was protracted, and it was quite asymmetrical. Because at the time, the clan factions that were coming out of Lincoln County and Garrard County, they were trying to exert their influence and power further afield. And so they weren't just going after the Republican leadership, the Republican tough guys in Rockcastle, but they were also trying to unseat them in places like Madison County as well.
Yep.
And actually, that eventually became their undoing. They overexerted themselves. They overstretched themselves. They were fighting feuds on several different fronts against several different families. And in fact, the leader of the clan, Walter Saunders, the Langfords and the Bethlehams didn't actually get him. He was killed in a separate campaign that they were launching in Madison County by a family called the Edwards family. Gus Edwards was the town marshal, and they'd sent some of the Kennedy family from Garrard County that had sided with the clan. Some of the Saunders and Ballard family had gone up to Richmond, and they were causing trouble up in Richmond. But you know, the Edwards family were a tough family as well, and that they weren't going to be intimidated. And so when they went up and had the outs, Walter Saunders and I think it was Tuck Ballard were actually shot and killed. So that was, you know, the clan leader at the time who had been causing all the misery for the Langfords and the Bethlehams. He was actually killed in a separate shooting incident in the other county.
Well, that's, I mean, the clan in Kentucky. That's one thing we have not covered as much on the podcast, and we need to get a little bit deeper into the in workings and how it all unfold. A lot, and then this is mainly my personal interest. Being on that early frontier aspect of Kentucky history. That's just one of my niches there. But that between the Civil War and say 1900 or so, even probably 1920, that the Klan had its reach across the state in many things, and the way you're describing this, it is a war after the war. They're trying to get a foothold here or there, and they're losing soldiers, and they got to back off, got to go to this county and so forth. It gets very complicated, and
it does.
Whose side are you on? I feel like that's a echo of a lot of Kentucky history. Is that whose side are you on during this? But it's interesting. Now I got another little question here, and this is one from my mom. I don't know if you'll have it, because when she asked me this, I was like, "That's a very specific question." But she said she gave a page number too, page 186-87. Is this the Martin Owens that preached at Providence Church of Christ?
Let me get my notes. I'll talk a little bit about this. So yeah, one of the Langford's main nemesis during this time was a man named William Ashley Owens, and his uncle, I should say, was Ashley Owens, who again held some political office in the county at various times. They were aligned with the Democrat family. He actually married a lady called Elza Jane Adams. So the Adams name's another family that crops up quite a bit with the clan in Lincoln County, and William Ashley Owens had that link. So William Ashley Owens had killed Henry Langford, which was James Langford's brother. So this was the son of Liberty Langford. He killed him in a shootout at a fair in Mount Vernon. James Langford swore vengeance, and then for several years there was these tit-for-tat attempts to kill, James Langford to kill William Ashley Owens, and William Ashley Owens to kill James Langford. James didn't succeed; he came close a few times, but whether it was part of the way the families and the kinship networks expanded, there was one newspaper article, as you say, where James Langford attempted to kill Reverend Owens. Now, when you research some of this stuff, you often come across several different newspaper articles that talk about the same event. You get slightly different information from different articles. This particular piece of information, I only found one article on, and it was very sketchy. So I included it in the book because it was written about at the time. But I did try to research it further, to go deeper into this attempted killing of this Reverend Owens. But I couldn't find any more information out about that at all. I tried to do a bit of genealogy as well on the Owens to see exactly the connection, but again, that was sketchy. So it's possible what your mother was asking, but unfortunately, I just couldn't take that research any further with the information I had.
Yeah. That's another. So Providence Church of Christ. That's where I went to church at. Growing up, that's where my parents and most of my family still goes as well. So then again, my mom's trying to make all the connections that she can.
Connect all the dots. Yeah.
Well, I was joking around with somebody the other day that we were talking about genealogy and all this kind of stuff, and a lot of people get into that when they get a little older. They start mapping out their genealogy. And I pretty much like, well, there's nothing for me to do though. My mom's already mapped it all out. So once I get older, it's like, well, it's done. There's nothing for me to do. But
yeah, it's a good hobby.
Yeah. With that, so back again with the Langfords, and this is just one of the questions that come in. I mean, I know Stephen is probably the answer, but out of all these Langfords, like who would you say? Obviously Stephen was the one that came first, but had the most impact on Rockcastle or in the area.
Good question.
I know that might be all of them might be the answer, but
I think undoubtedly Stephen's name has to be held in quite high regard in terms of the history of Rockcastle County. He's been one of the earliest settlers on the frontier, and everything sort of grew out and expanded because of the groundwork really that Stephen had laid in establishing that blockhouse. But certainly then after Stephen, for several generations really until the Civil War, the Langfords generally just lived a peaceful existence. They got on well with the neighbours. It was only after the Civil War that the name really started to come to prevalence again in the newspapers because of all this feuding. But undoubtedly, Liberty Langford, Senior, has left his mark because of taking the abolitionist stance, his potential work in the Underground Railroad. The fact that two of his sons were murdered in that feud, it's got to be an absolute tragedy for the family. Also a grandson, so Liberty Langford Jr., who was named after Liberty Langford Sr., his grandfather. He was also shot and killed by Jack Adams Jr. in the shop on Main Street. So when you actually look at the family tragedies that were going on in such a short pace of time, it would be heartbreaking for the family to experience that amount of death. So as I say, Liberty Langford, his two sons murdered. When he was alive, his grandson Liberty was murdered. He would lose another few grandchildren in the later feuds as well after he died, as well as all the Bethram relatives that he had that were getting killed as well. So it really was a tragic period of about 15, 20 years that the family went through all this heartache.
Now, in the first feud, is that? I mean, that's a lot of the Adamses. That would it be Langfords and Adams, and then the second feud is the Mullins, right?
Yeah.
So what switches us over? And one of the questions I'd asked was what makes it more unique. But I think you've already answered that. But what brought on the Mullinses?
Yeah, so after James Langford was killed by William Ashley Owens, that tended to bring an end to I'd say the first feud, the feud with the clan. The Langford boys grew up. Their father had been killed, and they grew into manhood. They grew into horse trading. They were still very much friendly and allied with their kinsmen, the Bethrams, who still hold political office in the county, judges and etc. And what eventually happened, if I just turn to my notes. So this was, I'm just trying to get the year that this happened. Yeah, so this is the sort of mid 1880s. So the Langford boys have grown into manhood. They're in the horse trading business. They're still very much aligned with the Bethrams. They're still very much aligned with the Republican interest in Rockcastle County. And there was a bit of a schism forming within the Republican Party. It was breaking into two factions. And I'd say that there was an old guard Republican faction that was centred around the Bethrams and the Langfords that still wanted to retain their dominance, their control of the Republican interest in the county. And then there was a new faction emerging, the Mullinses, the Fish family, and a few others, one of the paper editors, that were trying to set the Republican Party in a different direction, or trying to obtain some of that political power for themselves. And I didn't like the way that the Bethrams and the Langfords were clinging on to this old guard Republican power base. And so they split the ticket when the elections were coming up. I think it was the 1885 elections, through my notes. It might have been later than that, actually. 1897. Sorry, it was 1897. So, yeah, there was elections that were coming up. And effectively, the Republican Party, a group of Republicans who were unhappy with the Bethrams, they split and they became an independent ticket on the ballot.
Yeah.
They were nicknamed the Bolters. So this Bolter faction and the old Republican faction were on the outs, having a squabble, trying to win the spoils of the elections. And just previous to this, there was a few violent incidents, a few shots fired. One of the Langfords pistol whipped a guy called Egbert Fish. A few arrests. So tensions were really starting to heat up. The newspaper editor was slinging a lot of mud. Tried to slander Benjamin Bethram on sort of moonshine and avoiding tax on whiskey distilleries and things like this. So he was a judge, so he was debarred. So there was a real lot of behind underhand politics and mudslinging and newspaper getting involved. And then Boy Langford was the nickname for someone called John Damron.
Yeah.
He was great grandson of Liberty Langford. He'd adopted him when he was 2. He said his father was a bad man. He couldn't look after him properly, and so he'd adopted him. And because he was brought up in the Langford household, even though his surname was Damron, he was a grandson of Liberty Langford, and his nickname was Boy Langford. He was actually, I think he was friends with a chap called Hayes Mullins. And for whatever reason, they were having an argument one day. Hayes Mullins had mocked something that John Damron or Boy Langford had said, and in a fit of anger, he grabbed a gun and he shot Hayes Mullins, shot him dead. So I think this killing, there was already bad blood and tensions over the political situation. This seems to be an isolated incident, but it's just unfortunate that it was between the Langfords and the Mullins faction. So then things really began to heat up even more. And then there was actually, on the day of the election, I'm just trying to find the notes of when the election took place. 2nd of November, 1897. So that was the day they were holding the elections. So, everyone was out on the streets, going to their voting places. The outgoing sheriff was one of the Mullinses. He wasn't going to stand for re-election, but he was back in the Bolters, so he'd already announced who he wanted his preferred candidate to replace him as sheriff.
Yeah.
He was from the Bolter ticket. And so a group of the Langfords and their friends and family, they were out in a bad mood, and they crossed paths with Sheriff Mullins and some of his. There were quite a few Mullinses around him that were his posse. I think he deputised them to try and keep the peace on the election day. And they met in the street at a place called Crooked Creek, and words were said. I think there was some itchy trigger fingers. Someone made a move for a gun, and before you know it, shots were being fired. And this was probably all over within a few seconds. A gunfight, but it's probably over within 10, 20 seconds. And once the smoke had cleared, Henry Langford, unfortunately, was lying dead on the ground, and 2 of his friends were also injured pretty badly as well. So obviously, once the news of Henry's shooting got back and reached the Langfords, they absolutely went on a war footing, especially because of the family's history. They knew what the family had endured in the first feud, so they were not going to take any messing. They were guns ready, and there was going to be a big fight between the Langfords and the Mullinses.
Yeah, and which a lot of this is we talk about Rockcastle getting a rough name. This is around the time that Kentucky really gets into that rough name, or maybe really established it, because this is 1898.
Yeah.
in the following year, you're going to have the 1889 gubernatorial election. And then in 1900, you're going to have William Goebel gets assassinated as he's going to get sworn in as the governor. And this is, to say the least, probably one of the most hectic political times in Kentucky.
Accompanied with a lot of violence as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's just violence at election sites. And they claim in 1899 that it was just complete election fraud, and the person Stephen Taylor, I think, was the one who won. No, yeah, William Taylor was the one who'd won. Goebel contested it, and I mean, it was a quite a violent time, man. And like you said, just pistol whipping somebody, just on the street, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And
I mean, there were no angels. They had the principles. I'd like to write good about the Langfords, and maybe I've got a little bit of bias because my surname's Langford. But from telling the story, warts and all, they had flaws in their character. And it often boiled over into violence, unfortunately. But then if you look at it from a psychological point of view, and how the Langford boys had grown up and what they'd experienced from a young age, that being surrounded by such levels of violence, the unease of not knowing what's going to happen to you in the night time, when the clan are out riding around, families hiding out in the woods so they wouldn't get shot, and then so many family members being killed in such violent ways, it had to have made an impression on the Langford boys' psyche growing up.
Yes.
Unfortunately, they did grow up to be tough characters. And I think because of what had happened to their father and their eldest brother, I think their approach was, we're going to shoot first and ask questions later. Yeah. That's how we're going to deal with trouble. I'd rather face a 12-man jury than be dead.
There you go. That's probably. I mean, that's what it is. There wasn't. You say fight or flight. There was no flight. It was fight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, what else? I mean, so this this feud with the Mullins starts racking up. More things, more big events start taking place. Courthouse. What at Courthouse? What are some other the big notable moments in this feud?
Yeah, so shortly after the shootout at Crooked Creek, one of the people that were with Henry Langford when he was shot was his friend called John Lawrence. William Hunley was a man who had sided with the Mullins faction. He'd sided with the Bolters. And then he went and met John Lawrence on a road near Orlando, as you can read there, and he shot him dead. Some of the stories say it was over an unpaid debt over a gun that he'd bought or borrowed from William Hunley. But if you read between the lines, it was an extension of the trouble and the feud that had happened at Crooked Creek and around the election. So then William Hunley was arrested for the murder of John Lawrence. He went to court, so we went to the Mount Vernon Courthouse to stand trial. And while he was at that trial, I think the judge sensed that there was going to be trouble. And so he'd asked all the people in the courthouse to leave the building, become disarmed. They were going to be sort of frisked and searched as they went back into the courthouse. There was no guns present. And while they all vacated the building and went and stood on the street outside having a chat, I think the groups tended to split into their various factions. So the Mullinses and the Bolters stood together. The Langfords and their supporters stood on the other side of the street together. And Elzer Langford, who was one of the Langford boys, and his brother Peyton Langford, they just came out shooting Winchester rifles in the middle of the street in broad daylight. They didn't care who saw them. It wasn't violent nighttime assassination. This was broad daylight, middle of the street, middle of the day, and they just started shooting at the Mullins faction. And they wounded one of the Mullinses in the hand, and they shot the jailer, a guy called Latham King. He was critically injured, but he didn't die straight away. He did die, I think, several months later from his injuries. And the Langfords apologised for that. They said he wasn't the intended target. He was caught in the crossfire. Although I think he had sided with the Bolters politically, he was allied with them, but he wasn't involved in the trouble. So unfortunately, he was an innocent victim in the shootout. And as I say, shots were fired back in both directions. I forget how many shots were fired. Some say like 50 shots. And again, it sounds dramatic, but the truth is these shootouts, they were probably over in 30 seconds, probably less than that.
Yeah.
And then, the Langfords were arrested. They were put in prison. Then they were released on bail, so they were back out again. And still after vengeance. The thing that makes it different is throughout the whole history of Rockcastle, the Mullins as well had been on the scene from a very early age. Stephen Langford's, one of his wives was a Mullins. And all through the Civil War and beyond that, there's no real talk of the Langfords and the Mullinses, being hostile to each other. The Mullins were a big family in Rockcastle. There was a lot of Mullinses. I struggled to do the Mullins family tree.
There still is.
Yeah, I tried to do a Mullins family tree for the book, and I just got that confused. But the Mullins were a big family, and they were obviously Republicans as well. So they had been on good terms until this started happening. But from what I can gather, the Mullinses really didn't want a fight with the Langfords. After this incident, there was a peace committee that was established, and I think the Langfords and the Mullinses shook hands, said there'd be no more bad blood between them. I think the Langfords were feeling bad about what had happened to Latham King, but there's still a price to pay, and I think the Mullinses sold out William Hunley. I think they said, we don't want any more trouble, but the Langfords said, well, we want Hunley for what he'd done to Lawrence. And so that was the next thing. The Langfords went after William Hunley then.
Yeah. Well, and just to mention some of the things you brought up there, the Mullen Station is in Rockcastle too. It's more towards Livingston.
Yeah. The east of the county. Yeah.
And they do there's still quite a bit of Mullinses around. The Adamses too. There's a lot of Adamses now in Rockcastle. But the Langfords and the Betherums, I've never met a person that has a Bethurum last name in Rockcastle. Like their name dies out. Yeah. There are some relatives and some people, but the name. I know there are a few Langfords. It's not as prominent as it used to be. But it is interesting. I mean, I don't know what the judge was thinking. I mean, I guess he was probably making a good idea to say, "Hey, you guys need to leave the court, disarm yourselves." But now you've got a bunch of people armed outside that don't like each other.
Yeah, exactly. And then obviously ended in bloodshed.
Yeah. So the what did you say? William.
William Hunley.
Hunley. Yeah. That was the next part.
Yeah, so let me just get my notes. So what happened next? So it appears then that the Langfords tried to goad Hunley into attacking them. It's quite a clever tactic. They didn't want to just shoot him outright because then they'd be guilty of murder. So it appears that they have... so first they tried to kill U.G. Baker. He was one of the bolters. This was before the peace committee had happened and sort of the Langfords and the Mullinses had shaken hands and agreed on peace. But after that, they went after Hunley. So if you scroll down a little bit, so they went to so Elzer and Peyton Langford. They went to Hunley's house and they shot at him from cover. He then brought out charges against them for attempted murder. I don't think anything came of it. I don't think he could prove that it was them. But then Hunley, obviously wanted to go and kill Elzer and Peter Langford. So he went to Doc Langford's store. So Doc Langford was another one of the Langford boys, one of the brothers. And he owned a store by Brush Creek. William Hunley went there and there was trouble. And Elzer Langford came out and he shot Hunley dead. And that really put an end to this feud. He was the last person, I think, to die in this episode. And that drew a line under it.
Wow. It baffles you to think, these people went and shot at somebody and nothing really came of it. But it was all, like I said, tactic to get to lure him out so that they could,
Yeah. Well, I think this is the thing, in the 30-odd killings that were linked to the two feuds, I don't think there was a single conviction in a court for murder. I don't think anybody got convicted for murder, not one person.
Wow.
It was always, self-defense. Even when it wouldn't stand up today to as a self-defense. He just said it was self-defense because he'd said a bad thing against me, so I felt
Uh-huh.
threatened, so I went and killed him. And the
Yeah.
jury, oh, self-defense.
Oh,
So he's
he said something.
certainly,
He
yeah.
said something against my honor. I had to kill him. Oh, okay.
There wasn't a single conviction.
Wow. Wow. No, it is wild. It is wild when you think of today's time. But again, things were different
Yeah,
in that time. They had different mindsets, different
yeah,
standards, all that kind of stuff. Uh, yeah, and that like I said, that wrapped up uh, the last murder of this feud.
yeah.
Um, you know, you know, how do you define the Langford's legacy in Rockcastle? There's a lot to take in. I mean, there's more that we've not even talked about here. But how would you define it?
I think the history of the Langfords in Rockcastle County is a story that really would put Rockcastle County on the map because of just the things that went on that family was associated with through history. But the history of the Langford family in Rockcastle, I think it cuts like a cross section through the whole history of the county. I
Mhm.
don't think you could tell a history of Rockcastle County and not mention the Langfords. And you
Yeah.
couldn't talk about Langford genealogy in Rockcastle without talking about the history of the two are so intertwined.
Mhm.
Since Stephen Langford built the first log cabin there in about 1782, from that point onwards, certainly up until the early 20th century, the 1920s, 1930s, the Langford family so intertwined with the history of Rockcastle County, including the politics and the violence that went on there. The two are so linked, you can't tell one without the other.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the truth. I mean, they had a part in founding the community. They obviously had a big part in navigating the community through the 1800s and into the 1900s. It's pretty compelling story. Yeah, well, that's a pretty good summary. Obviously, if you want to know more about the Langfords of Rockcastle, I would encourage you to get the book. How can they get the book? Yeah.
So it's only published in one place. I self-published it, and it's available on Amazon. So if you go to
Mhm.
Amazon.com and search for the Langfords of Rockcastle County, my book should come up. Give it a good rating. I think someone's rated it 5 stars. Someone rated it 1 star. I think.
Oh,
I was a bit
come on.
unhappy about that. Have a read and give it a good
That's
rating.
probably somebody from Bell County who doesn't like Rockcastle County.
Probably.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and I'll put a note in the description too for the link so people can just click that link and go get the book. Again, I'm very biased on this. I'm being from Rockcastle, grown up and raised there. Um, and Rockcastle is obviously Kentucky history is big and big for me, but Rockcastle history is going to have that even bigger magnifying glass on it. And here the past few episodes, we've really dug into the Bethurums and now the Langfords and their legacies intertwined big time and had a big part in shaping Rockcastle's history. Anything else? I need to ask this question. Are you related to them at all, or is it just?
We don't know. I mean, obviously, we share the same last name, so there is
Mhm,
that chance.
mhm,
Most of the Langfords came from a small area of Great Britain
mhm.
in the south and the west of England. Geographically, just for your American audience, the areas that the Langfords came from is probably like the bottom quarter tip of Florida. It's that smaller area.
Yeah.
That's where all the villages were from. That's where the surname originated from. So there is a possibility that we could be. I haven't proved that we are genealogically yet. I've chased my own Langford family back to about 1770 in England.
Hmm.
I've hit a bit of a brick wall there, so I can't get any
Yeah.
further back. And obviously, the Langfords in this book from Edward Langford, are from the early 1600s. So yeah, I don't know if I am related to them. Yeah,
Now,
but we
the
shared the
Edward,
same last name.
the Edward Langford, he'd already went to America in the
Yeah,
1600s, right? Is that okay?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so yeah, it's getting there. I mean, maybe the branch is just a little further down.
Yeah. But probably the one last thing I would like to say is that you mentioned at the start what's my connection to Kentucky, and I haven't got one. But I do want to visit Rockcastle County before I die, so it's on my bucket list. I've spent 5 years researching and writing a book about the place.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I deserve to come and visit it at some point. So it's on my to-do list.
Yeah,
one of these days I'll book a flight and
there you go. And one of these days, I plan on coming to England and watching a Chelsea match or some sort of football up there.
Well, let me know, and we'll hook up and have a pint of beer.
There you go. Yeah. Well, again, Pete, thanks for coming on the show, talking about this great bit of Kentucky history, and thank you for doing the research, man. I mean, 5 years of research is a lot of time, and
tell my wife about it.
She probably wants you to research something more like go help me with these kids, right? Yeah. Well, again, thanks for coming on. Anything else before we go?
No, just thanks for the invitation. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, Jameson. And look forward to watching this back. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time. Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you, the viewers, the listeners. We want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.